Day 80 of the Atlantic Hurricane season, day 98 in the Eastern Pacific. It's August the 19th, and as you can see here on the overview map, we have a few systems active at the moment, though a few dwindling as well, especially in the case of Erin, which is now a remnant low. We do have two invests still in the Atlantic and the Pacific. 94L, which has formed off the African coastline and could be our next storm. 90C, which is about to follow Pewa into the Western Pacific over the international dateline, and the Western Pacific itself is fairly active at the moment with a few storms. Trami, of course, which is the named storm now to the southeast of Japan. Pewa, which has moved into the basin, moving towards the northwest, and is likely to become a typhoon. What's left of 13W, which has now moved into China, and still what's left of Utor, which is lingering over inland China at the moment. The Atlantic Ocean remains, well, fairly quiet for, as it stands. What's left of Erin is moving through the central Atlantic. 94L, which is moving off the African coastline, is a prospect for the future, and is one to watch, at least for the time being. The Indian Ocean remains fairly quiet, as is usual for this time of year. No systems expected to develop over the next 48 hours. As always for this time of year, it will probably warm up in a few months' time, say October, November. So let's take a look at the current sea surface temperatures then. This is the Eastern Pacific first of all. You can see the 30-degree gradient off the Mexican coastline, so very warm waters in that area. Out to sea towards the Central Pacific, you can see towards the west of Hawaii. All that area is certainly conducive for tropical storm development. Pewa is just over the other side now, but 90C is to the very western extent of that, currently over around 28-degree waters. Looking at the Atlantic, the western Gulf of Mexico remains fairly warm, 30 degrees or more. Same too for the waters just south of Cuba and near Jamaica as well. As far as the eastern Atlantic's concerned, you can see water's certainly warm enough, around 26 to 28 degrees generally, where those two systems are at the moment. And in the Western Pacific, you can see out to sea in the actual Western Pacific itself, away from the South China Sea, warm waters here for most areas, around 30 degrees generally, where Pewa's coming in around 28 degrees temperature, Celsius, which is certainly warm enough for cyclone development, and in the South China Sea at least 28 degrees, 27 degrees in some areas, but certainly warm enough conditions there too. So let's take a look at our new invest 94L, which formed in the past 24 hours in the Atlantic near the African coast. Current winds 25 miles per hour, pressures 1007 millibars and positions 12.1 degrees north, 21.9 degrees west, and it's expected to move towards the west-northwest. Perhaps a similar track to Erin, as a matter of fact, maybe just a little bit more towards the south. Could become a tropical storm. I know one or two of the intensity models are calling for a strong tropical storm, whilst others are not calling for anything at all as a result of this storm, so we'll have to wait and see what happens with this one. As far as tropical storm Pewa is concerned, you can see it here, just into the Western Pacific now. You can see the Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands well to the west there, and the storm's expected to move towards the northwest over the next few days, becoming a Category 1 typhoon, perhaps reaching Category 2 status as time goes on as well. You can see the very tiny little island just south of the 72-hour marker, which is Wake Island, and that's where the storm will pass closest to in the next 5 days. Apart from that, there are no land areas under any threat from Pewa over the next few days. Current winds 65 miles per hour and pressures 1000 millibars as it moves towards the northwest. Tropical storm Trami, which also formed in the Western Pacific in the past 24 hours, currently with winds of 45 miles per hour, pressures 993 millibars, current positions 19.8 degrees north, 127.5 degrees east, which puts it towards the west-northwest of the Philippines and towards the west-southwest of Taiwan, and is expected to complete a very tight loop as it moves towards the south initially and then back towards the north as a tropical storm, and then developing into a typhoon as it passes through the southern Ryukyu Islands in Japan and then passing the very northern tip of Taiwan before probably making the landfall in China. That's what the official forecast calls for in any case in the next 5 days. So let's take a look at the current shear maps then. You can see the Atlantic first of all. That little L sign is Erin, what's left of it, moving into a high shear environment, which will certainly tear what's left of it apart, considering there isn't that much of it left at the moment. And that low shear near the Cape Verde Islands is where 94L is generally, and a little bit of a high shear towards its southwest, but nothing too serious over the next few days at least as it stands. And you can see this is the eastern half of the Pacific now. You can see some high shear levels in the mid-latitudes, I suppose you could say, north of 10 degrees north. And you can see 90C, which is just to the very left of that image, which is just, well, near the international dateline now. High shear towards its north and northwest, which could interfere with any development, and indeed it's not got a high chance of development at the moment. And you can see the Western Pacific now. The tropical storm symbol is Trami, which is currently in the Western Pacific there in the Philippine Sea, and is in a fairly low shear environment, especially to its north, low and decreasing, except for just off the tip of Taiwan. So not too bad a running for this storm in the next few days at least. Now let's take a look at the moisture levels here in the Atlantic. You can see what's left of air in that little piece of moisture protruding into that dry air at around 40 degrees west. And as for 94L, not too bad in terms of water vapour, at least until it gets towards the central Atlantic. That's as it stands at the moment. And what's left of 92L you can see down there as well in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is the Eastern Pacific. You can see quite large pockets of dry air digging towards the south, and indeed around the equator as well. Some dry air here, so storms will have a difficult time developing in the Eastern Pacific, at least in the next few days. And you can see that big area of moisture, which is around 90C, which is just approaching the international dateline, a very broad moist area around that system. And in the Western Pacific you can see, as always, a very moist environment, a little bit of dry air just towards the southern Japanese islands. But nothing too major, and you can see the current storm Trami just northeast of the Philippines. Fairly intense rainfall occurring towards the central core of that storm at the moment. And this is the Western Pacific overview in the past 24 hours. You can see how that storm has developed. It's got a lot of cloud coverage associated with it, extending towards the northern half of the Philippines at the moment. But it's moving initially just towards the south very slowly, but then moving back towards the west, a little bit of a hint of westward movement, and then towards the north, and then north-northeast, and then probably curving back round towards the west as it heads towards Japan and Taiwan. This is the remnants of Erin. You can see not too much left of this one at all, quite pathetic as you can see here. Lots of dry air around the system now, so it's fairly expected. Not too much left of Erin. You can see on this one in particular where the centre of the storm is compared to the last little flare-up of thunderstorms and showers there towards its north. And this is Invest 94, which has just moved off the African coastline. You can see a few flare-ups here and there. The first one there off the African coastline. We'll have to see how this one goes over the next few days. Some models, as I said earlier, predict it to become a tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane, whilst others do not predict anything at all. And this is Tropical Storm Pewa, which is currently moving towards the west-northwest. You can see it's quite well organised now, and it's heading towards the northwest, and will probably pop an eye in the next day or two as it becomes a typhoon, which is certainly a possibility. It did weaken initially not too long ago, but it has re-strengthened to a 65-mile-per-hour storm, and is expected to intensify from here on in. So this is the CMC model then. You can see a storm forming in the Eastern Pacific and heading towards the northwest, becoming a hurricane. We also have a storm in the Gulf of Mexico, which forms towards the end of that loop there, not associated with what was 92L. As far as 94L is concerned, a weak tropical wave moving through the Atlantic is all that results of that one, maybe a weak tropical storm at best. The ECMWF model still predicts a storm to move towards the Baja California Peninsula in the Eastern Pacific, and 2 storms after that, as a matter of fact, which is quite rare actually, because the ECMWF doesn't always predict that many storms, so it must be fairly confident, unless that was just a one-off. The GFS predicts 94L probably to become a tropical storm as it heads towards the west-northwest, just to the south of Erin's track, and eventually head towards the western Atlantic, but probably will be no more by then, and also predicts a storm making landfall in the Baja California Peninsula as well. As does the NavGem model, actually not landfall but moving out to sea in the Eastern Pacific, a storm forming there, possibly a hurricane. As far as 94L is concerned, a very weak tropical wave moving across the Atlantic is, according to the NavGem, what it thinks will happen. The GFDL is actually fairly similar to in terms of intensity, nothing much, but I believe that sends it just towards the west-northwest rather than staying towards the south. The HWRF model has 94L moving towards the west-northwest, but you can see towards the end of that not too much coming of it, but you can see the system in front of it. It could even be the remnants of it. No, it isn't actually. It's a different storm that forms in the Caribbean, moving through the Lesser Antilles and then possibly becoming a tropical storm as it heads towards the Bahamas, which is certainly interesting to see, but no evidence of that yet. So this is the intensity comparisons for 94L. There's only the DSHP and the LGEM model there, but both of them predicted to become a hurricane at some point. So that's certainly interesting to see. As far as the track, you can see only the one model here so far, curving it towards the west-northwest, gradually more towards the northwest towards the end of the run according to that model. The shear comparisons have it high at first, well, moderate around 20 knots, and then slowly descending to around 10 and maybe even 5 towards the end, which is certainly conducive for development. Sea surface temperatures certainly not a concern at this time of year, 26 to 27 degrees at least for this storm as it moves towards the central Atlantic, certainly enough to sustain itself, and the relative humidity is around 50% at the least, 50 to 60% generally, which isn't too bad for the storm in terms of any development over the next few days. Dry air shouldn't be too much of a concern. So let's take a look at the CMC model in the Western Pacific. Then you can see that Trami becoming a typhoon, passing the Japanese islands and Taiwan, and then making landfall in China. Pretty much what the official forecast says. Another storm forming towards its its east rather, and Pewa moving through as well. Another system forming near the Philippines towards the end of that run. The GFS model has a similar plan for Trami as well, moving into China eventually, and then moving towards the northwest. Pewa moving towards the northwest as well, virtually what is forecasted before, and then looping back towards the south, and then moving towards the west towards the end of that one. That'll be interesting to see as a typhoon as well. The overall predicted season scores then for August the 19th. William is in first place with 59 points, Willyback 82 is in second place with 57, and Hurricane Barbara is in third place with 54 points as of right now. Of course, if any new storms form, if any of the current storms in the Pacific become typhoons, this may all change. You can submit your own storm totals at the website force13.com/interactive. Just click the 2013 Predict the Season button and submit your totals, whatever you think will happen throughout the Northern Hemisphere this year. But I would hurry if I were you, because the scores are declining, the scores that you could achieve as the year goes on. So what happened on this day then for August the 19th? In 1973, Tropical Storm Brenda made landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula. In 1976, Tropical Storm Dottie moved over Florida. In 1978, Tropical Storm Lane formed in the Eastern Pacific. In 1980, Hurricane Bonnie turned post-tropical in the Northern Atlantic. And in 1981, Tropical Storm Dennis skimmed the coast of South and North Carolina as it moved out to sea. In 1985, Tropical Storm Nora formed in the Eastern Pacific. The next year, Tropical Storm Isis formed in the Eastern Pacific. There it is pictured there. Bob passed Long Island in 1991 and made landfall in Rhode Island as a Category 2 hurricane, resulting in 17 fatalities of $1.5 billion in damages. Needless to say, that one was retired. There it is pictured. And in 1995, Tropical Storm Gil formed in the Eastern Pacific. In 1996, Dolly and Edward both formed in the Atlantic on the same day. In 1997, Zeta and Amber both formed on the same day as well in the Western Pacific. In 1999, Cindy formed in the Atlantic. There it is pictured there. Tanya formed in the Western Pacific as well on that day in that year. In 2000, Tropical Storm Debbie formed in the Central Atlantic. There it is pictured as well, moving through the Lesser Antilles. And in 2002, Tropical Storm Vongfong made landfall in China, resulting in $86 million of damages. In 2003, Tropical Storm Vamco moved over China and dissipated. In 2004, Tropical Storm Estelle formed in the Eastern Pacific, pictured there. In 2005, Hillary formed in the Eastern Pacific. In 2007, Dean passed Jamaica, resulting in 23 fatalities and $310 million of damages on the Greater Antilles as a whole. There it is pictured as well. Faye made landfall in southern Florida and peaked inland. And in 2011, Tropical Storm Harvey formed near Nicaragua. And don't forget, you can track any storm that forms, or indeed any that are currently active. There are a few at the website force13.com/stormtracking.html. That's the main page for the storm tracking information, where you're presented with the overview map, which shows you where the storms are, and the tables at the top and bottom, which show their intensities and indeed any warnings that are currently in effect. There are none at this time, but that may change very soon with Trami's track. It covers Invest as well, the storm tracking page, so you're certainly in the know with anything that's going on and anything that may develop over the next few days. And you can go in depth basin by basin to see the track maps for some Invests as well, some that are likely to form usually, and of course the storms and indeed any warnings that are in more detail. And you can also visit the social pages as well, YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Force13 is on all three of those mediums. Just search us on either of those and you should find us fairly easily enough. And please do show your support by doing the usual means of engagement, by subscribing, liking, commenting, favouriting, following, or indeed anything else that comes to mind. Just on either whichever medium you're following whenever you're there. And indeed you can comment underneath this video and indeed by private messages as well, if you wish to send a question or anything to that effect. It's 98 days until Hurricane Week 2013, which is our feature that we're running every year. The second time we're doing it this year at the end of November. It's a 6-day special feature with a new video every day. Just visit the website for more information, force13.com/HW2013.html. That's where you can find more information and get involved. We are certainly encouraging that. Any contribution and collaboration would very much be appreciated, and I think it would make the series much more enjoyable as well. And of course you can also visit the discussion forum as well, which is online, force13.com/forum, where you can discuss any current storms or indeed any past storms or indeed any other storms that you may be able to think of, even non-tropical ones we're doing as well if you wish. But as for now, the next bulletin will be coming at around midnight UTC on the morning of Monday, August the 19th, August the 20th rather, but until then that's all for now.